Hi everyone. This is the introduction to week 4 of our quarter as we move towards the latter half of our time together. This is the second week that we've been studying character, dealing mostly with Aristotle and the notion of character, which is the sum total of all your habits, good and bad. So if you have bad habits, which are vices, or good habits, which are virtues, that's who you are. And you can change your virtues and you can change your vices. Therefore, you can change your character. And the Greeks even said character is destiny. So if you follow the chain through, you can change your thoughts, which will change your acts. You can change your acts, which will change your habits. You can change your habits, which will change your character. And you can change your character, which will change your destiny. So the chain from thoughts to acts to habits to character to destiny means that your thoughts eventually can change your destiny. And I think we all know that in a way. And again, this is why I emphasize in this class character ethics. I said in an email to a student this week that one of the reasons I chose or choose character ethics is because I hope that in the discussion of our habits, our vices, and our virtues, that it seems to resonate with you, that it seems to make sense, that our questions of whether or not we are patient or honest or just or courageous, we understand that those are the elements of who we are as a person, but we also understand that it is better to have these virtues, and we also understand that they are a matter of choice. And last week's materials dealt with, of course, the question of happiness in the beginning of the week, then went on to habituation and talking about the mean between the extremes, and then went into questions of book 3, which is about choice and deliberation and the voluntariness and involuntariness. And Aristotle, as usual, is trying to break things down and noting, for example, different types of involuntariness of by compulsion or by ignorance. Um, and that choice itself is a product of deliberation. And so if our habits are things we've thought about and chosen, then in a way we can choose who we are, and we can choose to live a happy life, or at least move ourselves towards happiness on the things we can control. So there's a lot here that's on us, that if we are not a nice person, that's no one else's fault. If we choose not to, like the practical man, we choose not to reflect on things, that's nobody else's fault. So sometimes when I teach this in class, I'll talk to students and I'll say, like, imagine someday you come into class and I tell you, okay, I have an assignment for you and it's going to take the rest of the day. Let's say it's an early day at 9 in the morning. And I said, okay, the part of today's project is you're going to be here in class, um, or I'm going to assign you to a little room and you'll be there from like 9 to 5 or something like that. And then you get into this little room and it's just you. So each student is in their own little room, and you watch on a monitor yourself 15 years from now. You watch how you get up in the morning and you talk to your spouse or your children, or how you go order your coffee in the morning. Oh, sorry, there was a break. How you order coffee in the morning, how you talk to your coworkers, whether or not you have any prejudices or bigotry, or you watch how you talk to people on the phone, whether or not you talk behind people's backs, you look to see whether you're kind, or all of these kind of things. And what if at the end of this day, watching yourself 15 years from now, you just determine, wow, I'm kind of an asshole. I'm a jerk. I'm rude. Well, my question to you is, well, whose fault is that? If you're not that way now, let's say you're 20, and you are that way at 35, well, whose fault is it? It's your fault. Because you chose, or you made conscious decisions not to evaluate yourself, not to say, what kind of father am I? What kind of habits do I have? Am I a kind person? Am I a generous person? Am I an honest person? You chose not to reflect on your life. And if Aristotle's right, that means you're not going to particularly lead a happy life, a life of meaningful relationships, as we see at the end of this week's reading when we get to friendships. Because Aristotle said, you can't consider a person happy if they don't have meaningful friendships. I think that makes sense. So we would never wish a lack of friendships on our children or on our people we care about, because we understand that having good friends is an essential part of a life well lived. Well, you can't have necessarily good friends if you're not a good person. You might have acquaintances, but do you have any friends who would stick up for you, who would visit you in the hospital, would visit you in prison, in difficult places? Wouldn't just be the kind of friends that disappear when times get tough. Well, how do you have those friends if you don't have good habits that include kindness and care and honesty and all of that? That's his argument. And so my thought was, I could choose any kind of ethics I wanted to present you with. And in the first part of the quarter, as I've said before, we did the personhood one because I think it's so valuable to ask these profound questions about treating a person as merely a means to an end, or being authentic selves, or not getting lost into the world, and those kind of things on a very radical personhood level. But then in the more traditional level, I teach character ethics because I hope that it's the kind of thing that these questions might stay with you long after we're done in our class. Long after our time together is done, you can still ask, what are my habits? How do I treat people? Am I working towards being more honest or not as honest? What is my character made up of? If my character is my choice, what am I choosing to be? And I think that those are the kind of things that can stay with you. And you can even transport into non-moral issues, like what kind of manager am I? If being a good manager is a habit, just like being honest is a habit, and you want to make honesty second nature, can you make being a good manager second nature? Another non-moral habit is a good habit. I think you might call it a virtue, but it's not particularly moral, is being on time. If you notice the people who are always on time, it's a habit. They make it almost second nature. So to the Greeks, a life well lived is a whole series of excellences, of good habits, some of which are moral, honesty and justice and we might say compassion or generosity, and some of which are not moral. Being able to write well, being able to speak well in public, being able to what would be another one? Being able to be on time. Those kind of things. Being able to read well. Being able to have good study habits. In fact, we even use the word habit in study habits. These are the kind of things you are not born with, but you are born capable of becoming. And a life well lived for the Greeks is about both of them, the moral and the non-moral excellences or good habits. So, but no one else is in control of this except you. And so I wanted to spend at least 2 weeks on character ethics because I hope that it's the kind of thing that will make you think about a meaningful life of ethics as lived, not just thought. Because as Aristotle says, no one becomes good by listening to lectures. As much as a professor I'd like to think that, it just doesn't happen. It is very possible to get an A in an ethics class and celebrate your A by going out and cheating on your girlfriend or your boyfriend or stealing something. And what that means is there's no guarantee that knowing what's right and good will mean that you do what's right and good. And Aristotle says this, he's very clear about this. Many people think that they can listen to lectures and become a better person. Just like people in business think they can just take a seminar over the weekend on how to be a good manager and then just go to work on Monday morning and be a good manager. Or people think they can take a seminar about or marriage counseling over the weekend and all of a sudden their marriage is going to be fixed. The counseling or the seminar, all they do is point out the things that you have to start doing. that maybe you hadn't thought of. But you have to do it. Ethics is not about just knowledge. It's about knowledge informing behavior. So if you think that this class is a waste of time, then you can just know, you can even get an A in this class, but it will not at all affect your behavior. I think then the class becomes a gigantic waste of time. Students should have just taken another class in, say, statistics or something else. It is only in the hope that I would say Santa Clara assigns an ethics requirement. It is only in the hope that it will affect your behavior and make you a better citizen. And of course, to the Greeks, it all goes together. A life well lived, a life of the excellences, taking their place within a society, and a society that's governed by reason and ethics and law and justice. Which leads to the other things we'll be talking about this week. So we finished last week moving through all of that part of the character, and I've just now explained to you why I emphasize character ethics and think it's so important. In the hopes that it will stay with you long after the class is over. And we move into this week what's really the most important of all the virtues, which is justice. And justice is incredibly complicated. We saw at the end of last week the notion of legal justice, or justice as a whole. And this is that notion that we have of living our lives as part to make sure that other people get what's due to them, even in my own life. So if you've noticed, people can actually make you be better or want to be better just by being courageous in their own lives. So like 5 or 6 years ago, my mother unfortunately had to go through breast cancer. And nobody in our family had ever gone through this, and I didn't know much about cancer. And so I'm watching my father and my mother go through this, and my mother go through the chemotherapy and the radiation and all these things that I don't know. And I'm watching her never complain at all, even though it's scary. She lost her hair, all of this kind of stuff. And her being courageous made me want to be better. Now, legal virtue, or excuse me, legal justice is the idea of taking your place within the community by living virtuous in your own life, as well as making sure that others get what's due to them. So it's a very complicated notion, and I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but if justice is to give to others what's due to them, legal justice says not only am I to aim at that, but I am to know that in my own life, the more courageous I am, the better I can take my place as a member of the community, as a good role model, and I can help others. So it's almost like, imagine being a good parent and you say, okay, I want to be the best mom or dad I can be, but the first thing I got to do before I do that is take care of myself. Make sure I'm healthy. But notice that the healthiness, the taking care of yourself, the proper medication, all the things you need to be healthy as yourself is done not only to make yourself be the best possible, but to be the best possible parent. So do you see how that's other directed? And that's at the nature of justice. Justice is the virtue that is completed in the other person. If you live on an island by yourself, justice is not an issue. Justice, whereas courage could be, patience could be, self-control could be, but justice isn't. Justice is the virtue that allows people to live together, and civilization requires justice. And it's on many levels, but legal justice is this broad notion of virtue itself, which means that I live my life understanding to be the best possible person I can be, because then I can take my place within the community and offer the community my best, which includes making sure others get what's due to them. So most of the chapter on justice is not on legal justice, but it's just this huge overarching emphasis, and it's pages 112 to 115. It's very dense and it's very difficult. But notice what he says in there about how it's complete virtue. It's virtue itself. because it is the completeness of these habits directed then towards other people. Being the most courageous person I can be, then directed towards other people. It's kind of beautiful where you kind of say that I am going to be the best I can be, therefore I can be the best for others as well. Okay. Now, then the justice chapter or book moves into questions of partial justice. And partial justice, again, can be complicated, but don't let it confuse you. He's already talked about legal justice, which is justice as a whole. Okay. Now you're going to talk about justice in part. Legal justice as a whole deals with the whole of virtue. And whereas partial justice deals with shares of goods and security and honor, and whether or not a person gets too much or too little in terms of shares. Okay, so this is all in my notes, but make sure you get this straight. Partial justice is about shares. And there's two main parts or two main concepts of partial justice. There's distributive justice, and there's what's called rectificatory justice, or a justice that rectifies. Distributive justice is about shares because it's partial justice, and it's about fairness because shares are about fairness, giving fair number of shares to people who deserve them. Distributive justice is justice that is distributed. So let's say a government has 1,000 shares to give away, and you want to treat people equally because people are supposed to, justice and equality are very much related. Think about it. The symbol for justice is a scale. Scales are about equality. Okay, so you want to distribute 1,000 shares. Well, who gets it? Well, you don't give it to your favorites. You don't give it to the people who you like. Think about prejudice and racial prejudice. You don't give it to people of your own skin color because you have racial prejudices. That these are all ways of being unequal. Well, the distribution is you have to ask yourself, well, what is the method or what is the criterion or test for distributing? Now, for Aristotle, the test is how much do the parties contribute to the good of the polis or the community. So, for example, if you have firefighters and police and people in the army, and you say these three groups together contribute, let's say, 30% to the good of the community, and this group over here of people who pave the streets and people who take care of the community in terms of maintenance and in terms of, say, those kind of things. Let's say you say they contribute 10% to the community. Okay, and you're going to give up 1,000 shares. So one is 30% to the community and one is 10% to the community. And the 10% may be 20,000 people and the 30% may be 100. That doesn't matter. The numbers don't matter. What matters is the percentage. Okay. Now you have 1,000 shares to distribute. Well, those who contribute 30% to the good of the community, they get 300. And those who contribute 10% to the community, they get 100. Now you say to yourself, well, wait a second. I thought you just told me that it's about equality. But 300 versus 100, that's not equal. And Aristotle says, oh, it is equal, because 30 over 300 is equal to 10 over 100. They're both 1 over 10. And so this is why he talks about distributive justice is equality in the distribution, not in the exact numbers, okay? Now, I went over that relatively quickly, and I understand that that still might be confusing. So my notes should help you, and then make sure you read the section carefully. But remember, it's partial justice, so it deals with fairness, it deals with shares, and it deals with questions of advantage and unfair advantage. And like all justice, it deals with equality and people getting what's due to them. And the due here is how much did they contribute to the community. So they should get a proportion of the distribution that is equal to the amount they contribute to the community. And if you contribute 15% out of 1,000, you get 150. And if you contribute 55% out of 1,000, you get 550. Because you're getting an equal amount to the amount you contribute to the community. That would be an example of distributive justice. The other very famous part of partial justice about shares, again, or advantage, shares of honor and goods and security. The other one that's really famous is rectificatory. Here, it's just exact numbers, okay? Here, it's not proportional. He calls one proportional and one arithmetical, or one proportional and one arithmetic, but it's just exact numbers, 5 and 5, 10 and 10, okay? And so if I engage in a contract with you, he talks about the invention of money is important for equality in exchange. Okay, well, if I take something from you that's worth $10, then in order to rectify between the two parties, I have to give back $10. Okay, it's an exact number. What Aristotle does here that's interesting is when the exchanges are involuntary, a throwback to book 3, when the exchanges are involuntary and somebody hits you, for example, punches you in the face in a bar, Aristotle will call these crimes, make them into transactions. Now that seems offensive when you think about things like, murder and sexual assault, but in a way it makes sense because we believe in one of the most important principles in criminal justice is proportionality. We say this all the time, the punishment should fit the crime. If you know about the Stanford case, that's what's so disturbing about the Stanford case, about the girl who was sexually assaulted and then the perpetrator only got 6 months. Well, why is it offensive? It's offensive because it's as though the judge were saying what happened to her is not that bad. Because if it's not that bad, then 6 months is fine. And it's insulting because it really diminishes her as a person, going back to what we studied the first 2 weeks. It diminishes her as a person. But if the punishment fits the crime, then making a crime into a transaction that needs to be rectified makes sense. So and notice we do this in the law, if I arm robbery, let's say armed robbery is, I take something off your body worth $10,000. Or I burglarize your house versus $10,000. And they're both, say, $10,000 I steal. Why should armed robbery get a higher, why should armed robbery get a higher time spent in jail? Well, it should get a higher time spent in jail because it is considered a worse crime because, one, you could burglarize somebody's home, they're not even there. But it's more offensive. It's as though you had taken more, okay? So remember, shares are about gain and loss, fairness. When you take something off of somebody's body, which is what robbery requires, right? It's more than just theft. It's actually confronting a person. Like, you can't rob a person who's asleep, okay? Robbery requires that person being engaged and stuff taken from them. And so if the person feels violated, then that is considered taking more. So if somebody punches you in the face once, that's different than punching you in the face twice. Well, they should have to pay back more twice. Well, it's the same thing when we make distinctions in the law between what we consider worse and less crime. And so it might make sense to us to send somebody into jail for armed robbery to 5 years for taking $10,000 and send somebody to jail for 3 years or 2 years for burglarizing and taking $10,000. Okay? And so notice then the gain that a person gets when they confront your body is and making that into a transaction is more. It's the $10,000 plus the personal assault. Whereas the burglary might be the $10,000 plus maybe the lack of security you feel in your house, which we can take seriously, but we don't consider as serious as other things. And then we could take it even higher to things like sexual assault, where there may not be even money involved, but we feel like what you gained by assaulting another person sexually needs to be paid back. But we also believe you can overpay. If somebody burglarizes a house, they're 18 and they stole $300 and you put them in jail for the rest of their life, then the scale which had been like this now goes like this. Or the scale which had slightly been like this, now you go like that. We say you're piling on. That's not justice either. And so Aristotle kind of captures all of this in this discussion of rectificatory justice, and which is just purely mathematical. And the role of the judge is to make sure that each parties return themselves to where they were before the transaction. Okay, so the status quo ante. So I punch somebody in the face, I get a unfair gain. Then I have to either spend time in jail or pay that person back, or both, until it's felt that we're back to equal again, equality. Okay, again, I know there's a lot here. I hopefully it's in the notes. It's not meant to be overly complicated, but just think about it. If justice can be about shares in the distribution, or justice can be about shares between two parties, for example, between two parties who have a contract, two parties who have a transaction. And this is why money is so important to justice, because it may be very difficult. Think about a doctor who makes a mistake and cuts off your arm incorrectly. What do you want to make yourself even again? Well, what you want is your arm back, but you can't get that. So what the invention of money did, and this is why Aristotle talks about it, is money allows people to have even exchanges again. And some of that might be obvious. If a farmer who sells corn is dealing with a cabinet maker, and the cabinet maker doesn't want any corn, the farmer can't offer a certain amount of corn in exchange for a cabinet. But if the farmer has money, which can be used in the future as a means of exchange, then the money can be used by the cabinet to give to the cabinet maker, and cabinets can be taken. So think about how much the invention of money allows for courts to uphold contracts, to deal with crimes, to deal with restitution, to deal with making parties even, to making the punishment fit the crime, how much the invention of money allows for distribution of shares. So money is super important to the notion of justice, if justice means giving people what's due to them, and what's due to them is involving shares. That's why he spends a lot of time talking about reciprocity. Now I want to move on to the end part of the justice chapter, which is on equity. Equity is a word that we hear all the time. Do not start thinking about, when you hear equity, you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are all just kind of, I don't mean to dismiss them because I think they're important, but they're not used the way it should be used in law and philosophy. Equity is a very, very special term. Equity is an exception to law. Law, by its very nature, is a rule. It's generally written. No one can drive over 35 miles an hour. Okay? Now, what if the police say to somebody, I need you to do something, and you end up driving over 35 miles an hour, and then another police officer gives you a ticket, or you're driving somebody to the hospital who's dying, or you're trying to help the president of the United States because you think that the person's going to be attacked, and you're driving over 35 miles an hour. When you get a ticket, technically you're breaking the law, because remember, the law is written universally. But what Aristotle says is that the judge, or the person who's evaluating whether or not you broke the law should say, is this what the law intended? The law written so that nobody travels more than 35 miles an hour was not written for people trying to save the president's life. Another very pertinent example is, what if you had murder in the second degree and you read the statute and the statute is very clear, and then the prosecutor wants to apply that to a case where it seems to apply in terms of the letter of the law perfectly, but it's a case where a woman, say, had been beaten by her husband for several years, and then finally she kills him. And one night he's drunk, he beats her, and she ends up killing him. We might say, that's not why the legislature wrote the second degree murder statute. It is not just, remember, it is not just to apply the statute or the law in this case. So what equity is a pausing of the general application of a rule to this case. It is an exception. And it's dangerous because if you make too many exceptions, you undermine the law. But I think we all know that there are certain cases. I might write my syllabus very clean and clear and apply it in all, and say this is how an extension would work, or this is what I'm going to do here. But then when a student comes to me and says, my mom was diagnosed with cancer last night, and then I say, oh no, the paper's due. I have to treat everybody the same. The paper's due when the paper's due. You might say, well, that's not why, Professor, you wrote that rule. You wrote that rule for the students who maybe are lazy or don't turn things on time or maybe need a push. You didn't write it for the rule for the student who would have such a horrible thing happen in their life. And applying it to that student is unjust. Okay? So equity is a pausing in the name of justice of the application of a universal law to this case. It is still justice. Remember, legal justice is a form of justice, but equity is higher than legal justice. So when the law, and this gets confusing and there's no other way around it, but when the law acts in a way that's unjust because it's writing a general rule, equity in the name of justice will say, no, you can't do that in this case. You must make an exception in this case. And we know that in our lives with coaches who make exceptions and teachers who make exceptions. We expect the same thing for police officers, for prosecutors, for judges at the time of sentencing even. We might say that is not why the law is created. And so Aristotle says basically at these times we should ask ourselves, is this what the legislature intended? Okay. Now, then the week moves on to books 7 and 8. I'm going to go through these really quickly because this is already a long video. Book 7 it's laid out in my notes. It's basically the idea of, why do people who know what the right thing is to do, why do they not do it? Is it because they don't truly know it's right? Or is it something else? Are they overcome by passion? Are they do they confuse, do they know the rule? If the rule says be generous to all people, do they know that rule? Or do they know the rule, are they ignorant of the rule that says be generous to all people? Or are they ignorant that this is a case of generosity? Do you see the difference? One is general. Let's say humans should act generously. Now, is the person who is acting unethically, do they know that rule? Are they ignorant of that rule? Or are they ignorant, do they know that rule, and are they ignorant that this right now is a case of generosity? So they can be ignorant on the universal or ignorant on the particular. And again, we get back to questions of ignorance, which we see a book already going all the way back to involuntariness in book 3. So it keeps coming up. But it's still a difficult question because it's not always clear whether or not people who act unethically, whether they do that out of ignorance. They may do it out of compassion. They may do it out of a lot of other things. And as you see in the notes, Aristotle breaks it down and he says basically there's 4 options, and I'm just going to go through them really quickly. They're in the notes. There's the person who's virtuous, who knows what the right thing to do is, knowledge, does the right thing, action, and wants to do it, desire. Then there's the person he calls strong, who knows what the right thing to do is, does it, but doesn't necessarily want to do it. This is the person who might visit you in the hospital. They know it's the right thing to do, they do it, but they don't want to do it. Whereas the virtuous person wants to do it. Remember St. Francis versus Blackbeard? Okay? They both act, Blackbeard would be strong, knows what the right thing to do is, does it, doesn't want to do it. St. Francis knows what the right thing to do, does it, and wants to do it. Third is the one that the book or the readings that that you're coming across deals with, which is the weak person. This is the person who knows what the right thing to do is, but doesn't do it and doesn't want to do it. So we've had three options now: the virtuous, the strong, the weak. All three of them have knowledge. They know what the right thing to do is. The question is whether or not they do it and whether or not they want to do it. The fourth option is the vicious person. They're the person who doesn't even know it's wrong. So someone like Scrooge is not saying, someone like Scrooge doesn't think he's wrong. So the truly vicious person doesn't think they're wrong. Whereas the other three think they know what the right thing to do is. The question is, can they make themselves do it? Can they make the rule live inside them, the virtue live inside them? This is why book 2 is so important, so that they actually incorporate it as part of a life well lived. The more that they can do that, then the more that they will follow through and do it, and the more that they will want to do it. And these are building off of book 2, page 37 and page 42, okay, on the definitions of the virtues. So book 7 is a little bit complicated, but don't get lost in the weeds and let my notes help you. Book 8 is a nice way to finish Aristotle because it's about friendship. And it's about different types of friendship, friendships of utility and complete friendships that perfect us, and friendships of pleasure, okay? And he has some interesting things there to say. For example, between friends, there's no need for justice, because the love that friends have between each other will already take care of equality of money owed and those kind of things. What I do want you to think about is that friendship is also another nice way to finish Aristotle, because so much of Aristotle is about looking at us as humans that are supposed to live together and thrive and be complete and be happy. And remember what happiness is. It's a matter of moving us from potentially doing X to actually doing X and living a complete human life. Friendship is actually one of the more important things to actually make us complete. And I think we all get that. We can't imagine a complete life without meaningful relationships with other people. And if that's true, then other people and our ability to interact with them meaningfully in a way that they even call us out on things, as good friends do, they actually help complete us. So it's a nice way of all of this discussion of Aristotle, of happiness, of the virtues, of choice and deliberation and the use of reason, of justice in terms of both virtues and in terms of distribution of shares and rectification and equity, and questions in book 7 of why we do the right things or can't make ourselves do them, and all the questions that raises. Friendship kind of pulls that all together in a way, because friendship then is about completing our lives, as so many of the others were about too. Being the most, not being a different human, but being the most fully human you could be. And that's why Aristotle would say, as he does in his book, The Politics, human is by nature a political animal. Our very nature is to live together, and ethics and completing us is one of the most important ways that we can get ourselves ready to live together in a community, okay? All right, so we have this week, we have 2 quizzes. We have a quiz on the 16th, a quiz on the 18th, and then you have the 4-page paper, which I will post on Sunday, I think it is, at the latest, on books 3 and 4. Okay, I have office hours on Monday and Thursday again. If those don't fit with your schedule, just send me an email, or if you have any questions, send me an email. All right, have a good week.